A hooded man climbs gray steps carved on the side of the mountain. The wind grew stronger compared to when he started, but nonetheless he continued to climb. Each step a gush of wind threatened to push him over the edge, his cloak fluttered wildly in the wind. 1,000 steps he had taken, 1,000 steps to his death. Overhead, the sound of pebbles clattering and groaning of rocks, another problem to deal with. Much worse, it has started to snow. The hooded figure pushed on, no fear on each step, determined to reach his destination. The hooded man climbs for what felt like eternity, but at last he was nearing the end of his journey. The air was thin and cold, the snow turned into a blizzard, obscuring his vision. Only a natural bridge remained in his way, it was covered in snow, and so narrow that only a single man may pass at a time. With no hesitation he crossed the bridge. At the end was a gigantic door carved in stone, depictions of gods and mythical beings adorned its stony texture. The cold was now unbearable, his body shivered as he touched the door. He tried to push it with one hand, it did not budge, he tried with both, leaning on it along with what strength he could muster, but the door was just too heavy. The hooded man took a step back to examine the door. The gods were on the right side of the door, their faces unyielding, holding weapons of war. Mythical beings were on the left side, beaten and bloodied, defeated yet defiant. Kurok, Saga of the Gods, 17:18-19. Then the gods fell those who wish to harm to their creation, banished those that wish for eternal darkness, but the dark still remained, for it was born out of their creations, so a choice to be made, purge the dark entirely or strive against it, he preached. The door hums to life, the gigantic door slowly opens. Before him was a dark hallway, chandeliers with candles hanging from the ceilings, torches mounted on each pillar. The wind rushed in as the door widened, extinguishing several of the candles and torches. The hooded man stepped in, the darkness was overwhelming even with the lit candles and torches. The hooded man walked for a few moments before 3 men with monk-like clothes stopped him in his tracks, the darkness obscuring their faces. The hooded man instinctively reached for his dagger at his hips, he did not see nor heard them coming. The monks extended their hands, 5 fingers long and slender, their skin was a dark gold, they had a circlet around their head, it wrapped around their long elongated head and they had no ears. The hooded man took out his dagger along with its scabbard to surrender it, but as he got closer, he shuddered in fear. The monks, they had eye sockets but their eyes were missing, black ichor oozing out from their sockets, their mouths were sewn tight with some piece of string. The sight disturbed the hooded man a lot. The 3 monks stepped aside and allowed the hooded man through. From deep hallways he could hear what he could perceive as chanting or prayer. As he walked forward the chanting grew louder and louder until he was at a temple. There were things hanging from the ceilings, at the center was an altar, it had the symbol of theocracy engraved on the stone wall. On both sides were monks, on their knees in prayer, wearing the same clothes as those he met earlier. Ah! At last we finally meet, hero of the front, a figure standing at the altar spoke, his figure hidden behind a fabric with only a large shadow to show. The hooded man proceeded to get closer to the altar and then bowed down. Lord Archbishop, your subject answers your summon, says the hooded man, his voice one of caution. A long silence befell the room, for a few minutes the hooded man stayed in a kneeling position waiting. Remind me of the situation in the front, the Archbishop asks, breaking the tense situation. Your loyal armada has retaken our old borders against the Empire, the unfaithful are being purged in your holy name. We may be outnumbered and outgunned, but our faith in the gods will grant us victory, answers the hooded man, his voice filled with faith and conviction. I have heard of your exploits, and I must say they are as outrageous as they say, chuckled the Archbishop. Silence befell the hooded man, fear began to show in his face. Was I sent here to be executed, he thought to himself. He had broken multiple war standards thought to be implemented in the War of the Gods and thus were sacred, defying it would be considered blasphemous. My lord, as he stood up, he felt cold steel behind his nape. The 3 monks he had met before were now behind him, one holding the very steel that threatens to behead him. The hooded man became stiff in fear. Your life is not in danger, says the Archbishop, his voice filled with authority. The hooded man relaxed his body, releasing tension in his body as he heard those words come out the Archbishop's lips. Though the cold steel kept him at bay, unable to move, he awaited the bishop's next words. Do you know how I ascended as Archbishop? Asked the Archbishop, his voice full of sorrow. The hooded man kneeled back, silent, unable to answer. I am the very first to attain my position despite not being of notable lineage. My father was a mere fisherman, my mother had died at childbirth. I was merely 6 when I heard voices in my head. I tried to ignore them until I could no longer. I could not understand them at first, but as I grew up, the words became clearer. They told me stories like fairy tales, monsters, and heroes. I believed them to be only that, stories. I lived with the voices for 15 years listening to them. I had told my father, of course, but he had more important problems like feeding his little boy. I did not hate my father, I pitied him. His hands bled to feed us both, day and night, out unto sea, until one day he did not come home. That was when I understood my gift. 5 days before my father's disappearance, the voices talked of a lone wolf, one who would be left behind by the pack only to climb the highest mountain and stare at all of creation below him. The Archbishop pauses. That story was to be my fate, an orphan ascending to the highest position to oversee all of creation, the Archbishop continued. The hooded man, his head bowed down, what are you saying, my lord? The Archbishop's shadow moved, the voices, for the first time, mentioned a name. Your name, Ilderin, the Archbishop said. My name? Ilderin could barely contain his shock. Yes, Ilderin, the Archbishop's shadow shifted again. I hear your futures, yet I am blind to which one will come true, the Archbishop says, leaning forward he continued. The voices tell of 2 wolves leading a pack. Both saw a herd of sheep, one decided to protect and defend the herd, and the herd rewarded him with their flesh. The other killed and ate every single one. At the end I heard them whisper your name, Ilderin, said the Archbishop. I believe you have 2 destinies, one to destroy and the other to save, the Archbishop continues. What must I do? Asks Ilderin, confused in his voice. That is up to you. But I know what I must do, says the Archbishop. 2 monks carrying a golden exquisite cloak on a pole. They presented it in front of Ilderin, the fabric glimmering in the dimly lit room. Ilderin looked closer and saw 2 patterns on each shoulder, one a symbol of theocracy, a sun, and the other a moon. I name you Praetor, sword of the theocracy, one who will rule the night, the Archbishops proclaimed, filled with confidence and proud. Now, you are only second to me, wave the banner of justice and faith, use the sword of vengeance and truth, and go forth, destroy the enemies of the theocracy, the Archbishop continues. Ilderin took off his worn-out cloak, his skin a bright blue sporting 2 pairs of eyes on both sides of his head. With the assistance of 2 monks he wore the cloak of the moon, officially taking the title, Praetor. The camp was buzzing with activity. Soldiers gathered by the spaceport, officers yelling orders, all awaiting his arrival. They were tense, sweat dripped from their forehead, the heat was unbearable, but none dared leave his formation. Soon the shuttle slowly began to land, the officers shouted one last command, hail to the Praetor. Hail, 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 chanted the soldiers as loud music emanated from speakers all across the base camp. With a hiss and a thud, the shuttle door opened. 2 monks exited first, gilded in their red robes. The soldiers still chanted at the top of their lungs, along with the music blended in a thunderous chorus that could be heard a long ways away. As soon as the Praetor emerged with his golden exquisite cloak that shone like a jewel outshining the sun, his height doubled than that of a normal soldier. The soldiers chanted louder with a fervor like that of a fierce predator. The Praetor walked akin to that of royalty, his mere presence emanated an authority unlike any. The monks were on either side of him, matching his pace. Every step the Praetor took was unwavering, with a grace that of a maiden and a soldier, soft and gentle but stoic and disciplined. For several minutes the chanting continued as the Praetor walked at the center of the spaceport, To his flanks were lines and lines of soldiers stretching unto the horizon. The praetor stopped abruptly. The praetor turned his head towards an officer. Multiple medals hang in by his right chest, his insignia right above the medals tells that he was a Lord Knight. The praetor stared at him for a long while. The praetor's silver mask unnerved the Lord Knight so much so he dared not meet the praetor eye to eye, but he could feel his cold dark gaze. He was right to feel fear. After all, nothing was forbidden under the orders of the praetor. The praetor moved on. Relief washed over the Lord Knight. At the center of the spaceport was a tall stage, almost as tall as a transport vessel. The praetor walked up the stairs, each step synchronizing with each hail. The soldiers' chant stopped as soon as the praetor reached the top. All witnessed, the chosen, the named, as he walked toward the podium mounted with an audio device. The device ringed a sharp pitch. The praetor leaned forward, putting both his appendages at the podium. Darkness gathers, the praetor says, his voice deep and stoic. Over there just beyond our borders the enemy gathers its strength. He points towards the stars, and with every passing day their numbers grow. We have only begun. Retaking our old borders is but the first obstacle we must face. The enemy we face now is but a small fraction, our victories merely small in the grand scheme. Soon the enemy will come swarming in numbers like insects. He continues, I tell you this now because you are about to embark on the most important era of your lives. This war will define the future. Understand that many of you will not make home, he says sorrowfully. The praetor paused, letting the moment sink before continuing, you do not know me, but I know all of you. He gestured towards the soldiers. You are brothers, fathers and husbands. You are brave men willing to sacrifice your blood for a future free of our enemies. We are standing in the precipice of history. This is a turning point that will define our legacy, our place in the books. All of you will be remembered as heroes, as legends. Steel your hearts, brave men, ready your weapons, ready your armor. For when the enemy comes, they will find our will unbreakable, our faith unyielding. Follow me and victory is all but assured, he shouted. The soldiers erupted in roars and cheers and the praetor stood tall. The praetor watched as the soldiers' faces were filled with grim determination and courage. He felt satisfied. Later that day, inside the praetor's tent, a wooden table was at the center of the room. A wooden partition separated the meeting room from the praetor's personal chamber. 6 lords sat uncomfortably around the rectangular table. A laxi named Lord Rogue, head of the army. Their species are sentient rock species known for their rough exterior and are huge compared to most. 2 Felleril, Quiranta, head of public relations and Lord Corey, head of support division. The Felari are feline-like species known for their martial prowess and stealth tactics. A Biner named Lord Quint, head of the navy. They are species born with clear bulbous heads and tentacles for appendages. A Volpure named Lord Phasphos. They are a chameleon-like species known for their ability to camouflage, making perfect for assassination and espionage. And lastly a Zentari named Lord Summercaw, head of coin. They are an ant-like species known for their zealot-like faith and honor. They all waited anxiously for the praetor. Judging from the water containers on the table, they have been waiting for a while. Finally the praetor entered the room, accompanied by 3 individuals, 2 monks and a Clandu assistant, a weird assistant to take as they are known to be instinctive and their claw-like appendages not suitable for office work. All 6 lords stood as the praetor entered. Hail to the praetor, they said all in unison. The praetor sat at the end of the table in an elaborate chair. All 6 lords sat as soon as the praetor took his. All of them waited for the praetor to speak. They were taken aback as the praetor merely began to read a large stack of paper presented to him by the Clandu assistant. For another hour the lord sat, as if the last hours of waiting was not enough. This riled some resentment in the lords, but they kept it to themselves. As soon as the praetor finished reading, he stared at the 6 lords. His silver mask unnerved the lords. The praetor leaned forward, interlocking his fingers, placing his elbow at the table and resting his chin above his interlocked fingers. The room was heavy with tension. A flickering candle light shone on the praetor's silver mask, emanating an ethereal-like glow. The lords shifted uncomfortably in their seats, all avoiding eye contact with the praetor. At last, the praetor spoke. "I have gathered you all today for a reason," he began, "as you can see," gesturing on the pile of papers on his side. "I have been busy, reading reports, and it does not bring me joy." He paused, letting his words sink in. He picks up a piece of paper and reads its contents: civil unrest in multiple sectors in multiple planets. He picks up another: 16 civilians dead in a riot, and another: 211 wounded after Rio. Who is responsible for keeping the peace? He read frustratingly. The praetor scanned the room. All the lords were glancing at the fellowral farthest from the praetor. The fellowral met his gaze for only a moment before bowing her head. The fellowral closed her eyes, trying to summon the courage from the depth of her being. Her mouth was dry and wishing she would disappear, but alas, she found her courage. With a deep breath, she steadied herself. "It is me, my lord," she says. The praetor's eyes were locked, his gaze cold and sharp. "And what is your name?" the praetor asked. "I am Lady Quiranta, my lord," she answered, her voice now confident. "I am in charge of public relations," she continues. "Lady Quiranta," the praetor repeated. "As head, these reports," the praetor continues, gesturing to the papers on the table, "these are simply unacceptable." Lady Quiranta shuddered at the comment, fully knowing what fate's failures end firsthand. But she did not waver. "I accept any punishment you give me, my lord," she says, her voice confident and unwavering. "If you give me time, I can make this right," she continued. The praetor's gaze remained on her. He paused, considering her words. "1 week, no more no less. Bring me results," the praetor commanded. "Thank you, my lord," Lady Quiranta says, relief on her face. "If I may, my lord," she says, her voice unsure. "I have already laid down plans for pacifying the public." She paused. "Out with it," the praetor commanded. Lady Quiranta took a deep breath, readying herself. "In order for my plans to work, I need more manpower," she says confidently. "My men have already determined quite a number of people responsible for stirring the public. I would like to be given the permission and means to eliminate them," she says. "You want my men, is that what it is?" Lord Phasphos asks, one of his eyes looking directly at Lady Quiranta. "Precisely, my lord, as well as permission to it out," Lady Quiranta explains. "Why not just grab them and kill them in public as a warning?" asks Lord Rogue, his stony skin cracking as he shifts his position. "Lord Rogue, I believe choosing that option would only lead to more resistance and hatred towards us. If somehow, some way they were to have an accident, such as falling beams, or commit suicide, the resistant populace would be leaderless and unorganized, easier to pacify," Lady Quiranta explained. "And what happens after? How do we ensure total pacification?" the praetor asks. "That is where I come in, offering rations, public projects, and trying to appease the public. With this we could keep our control without resorting to violence," Lady Quiranta explains. "Do you plan to kill them at the same time?" the praetor asks. "Yes, my lord, as soon as we eliminate them we should see its effect," Lady Quiranta says. "No, make it irregular, not all at once, less suspicious." "I'll give you a month rather than a week," the praetor says. "Lord Phasphos, give her the men she needs," the praetor says, turning to Lord Phasphos. Lord Phasphos bowed, acknowledging his command. The praetor turned to Lady Quiranta. "Do not fail me," he commanded. "I do not like this," Lord Rogue grumbled. "This action is dishonorable," he continued. "I have to agree with Lord Rogue," says Lord Summercaw, turning to the praetor. The praetor met his eyes. "I assume you have an alternative, Lord Summercaw," says the praetor. "Diplomacy has and always been one of our family's specialties," Lord Summercaw says. "I suggest putting assassination as a last resort. Let my people try to talk to them to find a way to sway them to our side," he continued. "And if they refuse?" the praetor asks. "They die," Lord Summercaw answers coldly. "Lady Quiranta," says the praetor, turning to the fellowral. "It is acceptable, my lord," she answers. "Very well, Lord Summercaw, you are to coordinate with Lady Quiranta," the praetor commanded. Both bowed in acknowledgement. "Now with that out of the way, I happen to notice that our numbers are low, the praetor continued. Lord Rogue, the praetor asks. Lord Rogue shifted in his seat, his chair creaking as he did. My lord, recruitment is slow. People are reluctant to join our cause, he explains. The people are fearful of the Empire's wrath, he continued. Double their pay, tell them they will receive a coin upon recruitment, increase their benefits, do everything you can to entice them, the praetor says. Lord Summercaw, taken aback by the command, spoke. My lord, if I may, he says. The praetor turned to him. We do not have the means to pay them double. Our push to retake our old border has appeared to drain it, he continued. He took a deep breath, ready for whatever was coming. Surprisingly, the praetor was calm. I see, he says. Lord Summercaw, go back to your records, analyze it and report it to me, he commands. Lord Rogue, once I procure necessary funds, begin recruitment immediately, he continues. Yes, my lord, answered Lord Rogue. My lord, if I may, says Lord Quint. I would like to formally request for a new shipmaking station. If we make it near the front, it would lessen the time a ship takes for repairs, he says. I will take it into consideration, the praetor says. The praetor noticed the old Felleril sitting quietly as the meeting neared its end. Lord, the praetor asks, gesturing towards the old Felleril. Lord Corey, head of the support division, Lord Corey says. Lord Corey, do you have anything to add to this meeting? The praetor asks. I do, Lord Corey answered. The praetor listens, leaning back in his chair. He gestures to proceed and the old Felleril adjusted his body to face the praetor. Do you wish to rule? Lord Corey asks. The praetor was confused by the sudden question, so did the people in the room. The praetor took a minute to respond. The praetor thought long and hard, but the answer eludes him, for he does not know the answer himself. I do not know, the praetor answers. The praetor looks toward the old Felleril. He does not know what the old Felleril is thinking, nor does he understand the intention for that out-of-the-blue question. The old Felleril seemed satisfied with the answer as he huffed and nodded. You are dismissed, the praetor commanded. The 6 lords stood up almost at the same time, bowed towards the praetor and exited the room. The praetor sat there asking himself if he answered correctly to the question Lord Corey asked him. A paper fell from the pile left at the table. As it slowly reaches the ground, the praetor noticed the headline of the report saying, Unknown radioactivity anomaly detected.